Long before highways stretched across America, before glowing city skylines painted the night, there was a small, forgotten town called Maple Hollow. Nestled between endless forests and gentle rolling hills, Maple Hollow was the kind of place where mornings began with birdsong instead of alarms, and evenings ended beneath skies so full of stars that people often forgot to go inside. Every home had a wooden porch. Every garden bloomed with lavender, roses, and wildflowers. And every evening, just before sunset, one lantern would glow before all the others. It belonged to Eleanor Harper. She was 74 years old. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a straw hat, and her smile carried the quiet warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime listening more than speaking. For nearly 50 years, Eleanor had cared for the old lantern that stood at the center of Maple Hollow. Nobody truly remembered who built it. Some believed it had stood there for more than 100 years. Others said it was older than the town itself. But every evening, as golden sunlight slipped behind the hills, Eleanor would slowly walk to the lantern, carrying a tiny brass key. She never hurried. She greeted every neighbor. She smiled at every child. She stopped to admire every flower growing beside the road. Because, as she often said, there is no need to rush toward tomorrow when today is still beautiful. The people of Maple Hollow loved those words. Children repeated them. Parents remembered them. Even visitors carried them home. When Eleanor reached the lantern, she carefully opened its small glass door. She trimmed the wick, filled the lamp with fresh oil. Then, just as the first evening star appeared, she lit the flame. Its light was never bright enough to illuminate the entire town. But somehow, it always felt like enough. The warm, golden glow reflected softly across nearby windows. Cats curled beneath porch swings. Dogs stretched lazily beside fireplaces. The scent of fresh bread drifted through quiet streets. Somewhere, an old piano began playing a slow melody. Wind moved gently through maple leaves, creating a sound almost like whispered music. Nobody spoke loudly after the lantern was lit. Not because there was a rule, but because peace itself seemed to arrive with its warm light. On many evenings, Eleanor would sit on a wooden bench nearby. She watched fireflies dance across the grass. She watched families walk hand in hand. She watched the moon slowly climb into the night sky. Sometimes she would simply close her eyes, listening to the breeze, listening to distant crickets, listening to the quiet rhythm of another peaceful day coming gently to its end. And if you had wandered into Maple Hollow on one of those evenings, you might have forgotten every worry you carried. You might have breathed a little slower. You might have smiled without even realizing it. Because some places don't ask you to change. They simply remind you how peaceful life can be. The evening arrived quietly, just as it always had in Maple Hollow. The golden sunlight drifted gently across the hills, turning every maple leaf into a soft shade of amber and crimson. A cool breeze wandered through the town, carrying the comforting scent of cedar wood, fresh bread, and blooming lavender. Eleanor Harper walked the familiar stone path with her little brass lantern key resting in the pocket of her warm wool coat. She smiled at everyone she passed. Mr. Dawson was watering his roses. Two children sat beneath the old oak tree, reading a picture book together. A sleepy golden retriever stretched lazily on a wooden porch, barely opening one eye as Eleanor walked by. Nothing ever seemed to rush in Maple Hollow. Even time itself appeared to slow down. As Eleanor reached the town lantern, she noticed someone she had never seen before. A young traveler sat quietly on the wooden bench nearby. His weathered backpack rested beside him. His boots were dusty from many miles of walking. He wasn't reading. He wasn't looking at a map. He simply watched the lantern with peaceful curiosity. Eleanor smiled warmly. "Good evening," she said softly. The traveler returned the smile. "Good evening." His voice carried the gentle tiredness of someone who had spent many nights beneath open skies. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I've been traveling across America for nearly a year." Eleanor nodded kindly. "And what brings you to Maple Hollow?" Daniel looked toward the glowing hills. "I wasn't searching for this town. I simply followed a quiet country road. Then I saw the lantern, and somehow, it felt like home." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Many people say that." Without another word, she unlocked the lantern's tiny glass door. She carefully trimmed the wick, filled it with fresh lamp oil. Then, just as the first evening star appeared above the trees, she lit the flame. The warm, golden light spread across the peaceful square. Daniel watched silently. "I've visited busy cities," he whispered. "I've crossed mountains. I've slept beside rivers, but I've never seen people become so peaceful from a single light." Eleanor looked at the glowing lantern. "It isn't the lantern. It's the reminder." Daniel tilted his head. "Reminder," she nodded. "To slow down, to breathe, to notice the wind, to remember that this moment will never come again." The traveler remained silent for a long time. Some lessons never needed more words. Nearby, church bells echoed gently across the valley. Families stepped onto their porches. Windows glowed with warm yellow light. Somewhere in the distance, someone began playing an old violin. Its slow melody floated through the evening air like a gentle lullaby. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. For the first time in many months, he realized he wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He wasn't wondering where he would sleep next. He wasn't worried about the long road ahead. He simply listened. The wind moved softly through the maple trees. Crickets began their quiet evening song. Fireflies danced above the grass like tiny floating stars. The entire town seemed to breathe together. After a while, Eleanor stood from the bench. "Would you care for some tea?" Daniel smiled. "I would like that very much." They walked slowly toward Eleanor's little cottage at the edge of town. Its white wooden fence was covered with climbing roses. A tiny wind chime swayed gently beside the front porch. Inside, a kettle rested above a small fireplace. The room smelled of cinnamon, honey, and old books. Shelves lined every wall, filled with stories collected over a lifetime. Some books were worn with age. Others looked as though they had never been opened. Eleanor poured 2 cups of warm chamomile tea. Steam curled gently into the quiet room. Outside, the moon climbed higher above Maple Hollow. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "I've traveled thousands of miles," he said quietly. "But tonight feels like the first evening I've truly rested." Eleanor smiled. Sometimes peace isn't found at the end of the journey. Sometimes it's waiting in the place we almost passed by. The fire crackled softly. The old clock ticked slowly. Outside, the lantern continued to glow over Maple Hollow, guiding no ships, leading no travelers, asking nothing in return except one simple thing: slow down. Breathe deeply, and let the peaceful night gently carry you toward sleep. Morning arrived so gently that it felt less like the beginning of a new day and more like the quiet continuation of a peaceful dream. A pale golden light spilled across the hills of Maple Hollow. Tiny drops of dew rested on every blade of grass, sparkling like little crystals beneath the rising sun. The town was still asleep. Only the birds welcomed the morning. Their soft songs drifted through the cool air as a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of pine, wildflowers, and fresh earth. Daniel stepped onto Eleanor's front porch with a warm mug of tea in his hands. He watched thin ribbons of morning mist slowly disappear from the valley below. Everything felt calm. Everything felt unhurried. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten existed. A few moments later, Eleanor joined him, wearing her familiar straw hat and carrying a small woven basket. "Would you like to see my favorite place?" she asked with a gentle smile. Daniel nodded. "I'd love to." Without another word, they began walking along a narrow trail that disappeared into the forest beyond the town. The path was lined with towering maple trees, whose leaves whispered softly above their heads. Sunlight filtered through the branches in long, golden beams. Tiny rabbits hopped quietly through the ferns. Bluebirds fluttered from branch to branch. Somewhere nearby, a peaceful stream sang its endless song over smooth stones. Neither of them felt the need to hurry. Sometimes they walked in silence. Sometimes Eleanor pointed toward an ancient oak tree or a family of deer grazing quietly in a nearby meadow. After nearly an hour, the forest slowly opened. Daniel stopped walking. Before them stretched the most beautiful garden he had ever seen. Wildflowers covered the meadow in every color imaginable. Lavender danced gently in the breeze. White daisies nodded beneath the morning sun. Bright blue cornflowers stretched toward the sky. Hundreds of butterflies floated peacefully from blossom to blossom. In the very center of the garden stood an enormous willow tree. Its graceful branches touched the earth like soft curtains of green silk. Beneath its shade rested an old wooden bench. "This place," Daniel whispered. "It's beautiful." Eleanor smiled. "The town calls it the Quiet Garden. Almost no one comes here. Not because it's hidden, but because most people are simply too busy to notice the little path." Daniel slowly sat beneath the willow tree. The air felt cooler here. The breeze sounded softer. Even the birds seemed to sing more gently. For several long minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of life. Bees hummed peacefully among the flowers. Leaves rustled overhead. A nearby brook continued its gentle melody. Somewhere far away, a church bell echoed once across the valley. Daniel closed his eyes. His breathing became slower. His shoulders relaxed. His mind, so often filled with plans and worries, became wonderfully quiet. Eleanor looked toward the endless sky. "When I was a little girl," she said softly, "my grandmother brought me here whenever life felt confusing." Daniel listened carefully. "She told me something I've never forgotten." Eleanor smiled. "Nature never rushes. The trees don't hurry to grow. The river doesn't race toward the sea. The stars never compete to shine first." She looked toward Daniel. Yet somehow, everything arrives exactly when it should. Daniel smiled. "I think I needed to hear that." A small robin landed only a few feet away. It tilted its tiny head as though curious about its visitors, before hopping gently into the tall grass. The hours passed almost unnoticed. Clouds drifted lazily across the blue sky. Sunlight shifted slowly through the willow branches. No clocks ticked. No engines roared. No phones rang. only the peaceful rhythm of nature remained. Before leaving, Eleanor reached into her basket and spread a small picnic beneath the tree. Fresh bread, local honey, sweet apples, a slice of warm cinnamon cake. Daniel laughed quietly. "I don't think I've ever tasted food this slowly." Eleanor smiled. "That's because today, you're finally tasting the moment as well." As afternoon slowly faded toward evening, they began the walk back to Maple Hollow. The familiar lantern stood waiting in the town square. Soon, as always, its warm golden light would shine once more across the quiet streets. And somewhere deep inside Daniel's heart, something had already begun to change, not in a loud or dramatic way, but gently, like the first evening star appearing in the peaceful American sky. A quiet reminder that happiness isn't always found by searching farther. Sometimes, it's waiting in the places where the world grows still, the wind grows softer, and the heart finally learns to rest. As the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, Maple Hollow welcomed another peaceful end. That evening, the lantern once again bathed Maple Hollow in its gentle golden light. Daniel found himself walking more slowly than he ever had before. He no longer counted the miles behind him or wondered how many roads still lay ahead. Instead, he noticed the little things: a robin singing from a fence post, the scent of fresh pine drifting through the cool air, and the comforting sound of distant wind chimes. After supper, Eleanor smiled and handed him a small woven blanket. "There is one more place I'd like you to see," she said softly. Together they followed a narrow trail that curved through the edge of the forest. Fireflies floated lazily above the grass, their tiny lights blinking like stars that had wandered down from the sky. Soon they heard the quiet murmur of flowing water. A gentle river appeared between the trees, its surface glowing beneath the moonlight like polished silver. "This is the Dream River," Eleanor whispered. Daniel looked at her with a curious smile. "Why do they call it that?" She sat on an old wooden dock that stretched over the water. "When I was a little girl," she began, "my grandmother told me that every peaceful dream ever dreamed in Maple Hollow found its way here." Daniel listened as the river continued its endless song. "Of course," Eleanor laughed softly. "It's only an old story. But sometimes," she added, looking at the moon's reflection, "the best stories don't need to be true to bring comfort." Daniel dipped his fingertips into the cool water. Gentle circles spread across the river until they disappeared into the darkness. For a long while, they simply sat together. No one hurried, no one spoke. The breeze moved softly through the tall reeds. Owls called quietly from the distant woods. Somewhere nearby, frogs sang their slow evening chorus. The moon climbed higher into the sky. Daniel realized he could not remember the last time he had allowed himself to sit without checking the time, without planning tomorrow, without worrying about yesterday. Only this moment existed. Only the river. Only the stars. Only the peaceful sound of water flowing endlessly toward places unknown. Eleanor closed her eyes. "My husband and I came here every summer evening." Daniel turned toward her. "We didn't always talk. Sometimes we simply watched the river. After many years together," she smiled, "silence became our favorite conversation." Daniel smiled gently. The words settled into his heart like falling autumn leaves. Across the river, a family of deer stepped quietly from the trees to drink from the water's edge. They moved slowly, peacefully, without fear. Even nature seemed to understand that this little place belonged to quiet hearts. A shooting star crossed the night sky. Daniel watched it disappear beyond the hills. "I used to think happiness was waiting somewhere far away," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "So did many people." "And what do you think now?" Daniel looked across the moonlit water. "I think happiness was walking beside me all along." The old woman smiled, saying nothing more. The river continued its gentle journey. The lantern glowed in the distance. The stars filled the heavens, one by one. And somewhere, carried by the cool night breeze, came the faint scent of lavender from the gardens of Maple Hollow. It was the kind of evening that asked for nothing. Nothing to achieve, nothing to fix, nothing to chase, only to breathe, only to listen, only to rest. As they slowly walked back toward the town, Daniel looked over his shoulder one last time. The Dream River shimmered beneath the moonlight, peaceful as ever. Its quiet melody faded gently into the distance, like a lullaby that had been singing for hundreds of years. And above the sleeping valley, the stars watched silently, keeping their gentle promise that tomorrow would arrive in its own perfect time. The days in Maple Hollow seemed to flow together like a quiet stream, each one gentle, each one beautiful in its own simple way. Daniel had stopped counting how many mornings he had spent in the little town. For the first time in years, the number no longer mattered. One warm summer evening, just before sunset, Eleanor knocked softly on the cottage door. "Bring your blanket," she said with a smile. "We're going to watch the stars." Daniel followed her along a winding path that climbed the highest hill overlooking Maple Hollow. The climb was slow, but neither of them minded. Wildflowers brushed gently against their legs. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of fresh grass and blooming lavender. Far below, the tiny town glowed with warm golden lights. The old lantern in the square shone like a welcoming candle, its soft light reaching every quiet street. By the time they reached the hilltop, the last colors of sunset were fading beyond the western horizon. The sky slowly transformed from golden orange to deep blue. One by one, the first stars appeared, then another and another, until thousands of tiny lights filled the heavens above them. Daniel lay back on his blanket. He had seen stars before, but never like this. Without city lights, the night sky stretched endlessly from one horizon to the other. The Milky Way shimmered softly overhead like a silver river flowing across the universe. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The wind whispered gently through the tall grass. Crickets sang their endless evening melody. Somewhere far away, an owl called from the forest. The entire world seemed wrapped in perfect stillness. Eleanor finally broke the silence. "When I was young," she whispered, "my father used to bring me here. He told me something I never forgot." Daniel turned his head toward her. He said, "Whenever life feels heavy, look up. The stars have watched every generation before us. They watched our grandparents. They watched our parents. And long after we're gone, they'll continue shining with the same quiet kindness." Daniel smiled softly. There was comfort in that thought. The stars asked nothing from anyone. They simply shone, patiently, faithfully, night after night. A gentle breeze moved across the hill, carrying with it the comforting scent of pine trees from the forest below. Daniel closed his eyes. He listened, not to music, not to voices, but to the peaceful sounds that most people hurried past every day. The rustling grass, the distant river, the quiet wind, his own slow breathing. It felt as though the entire earth was gently rocking him toward sleep. After a while, Eleanor pointed toward the northern sky. A shooting star glided silently across the darkness before disappearing beyond the mountains. Daniel watched without making a wish. He realized he didn't need one. Everything he had been searching for, peace, stillness, rest, he had already found. Below them, Maple Hollow rested peacefully beneath its blanket of stars. Warm lights glowed from cottage windows. The old lantern continued its quiet watch over the sleeping streets. Somewhere a dog barked once before settling down for the night. A porch swing moved gently in the breeze. Nothing more, nothing less. Just another peaceful evening in a town that never hurried. Hours passed, almost unnoticed. The moon climbed higher. The stars became brighter. The cool night air wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Eventually, Eleanor stood, brushing a few blades of grass from her coat. "It's time," she whispered. Daniel nodded. Together they walked slowly back down the hill. The path shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight. Fireflies floated through the fields beside them, blinking softly like tiny lanterns leading them home. As they reached the edge of Maple Hollow, Daniel stopped for one last look at the sky. Thousands of stars still watched silently above. He smiled, not because something extraordinary had happened, but because he had learned something wonderfully simple. Some of life's greatest treasures cannot be bought. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be chased. They arrive quietly, like moonlight on a peaceful hill, like a warm lantern in a sleepy town, like a gentle breeze through ancient maple trees, and like the comforting feeling of finally realizing you are exactly where you need to be. With that thought resting peacefully in his heart, Daniel followed Eleanor home. Behind them, the stars continued their silent journey across the endless American sky. Ahead of them, the little lantern glowed patiently in the center of Maple Hollow, waiting to welcome another beautiful tomorrow. Autumn arrived quietly in Maple Hollow. The maple trees dressed themselves in shades of crimson, amber, and gold. Cool morning breezes carried the scent of fallen leaves, fresh cedar, and distant fireplaces. Every sunrise painted the little town with a soft, golden light, while every evening ended beneath the familiar glow of the old lantern. Daniel had planned to stay only one night. Somehow, the days had become weeks, and the weeks had quietly become months. He no longer felt like a traveler. Maple Hollow had become home. Every morning, he helped neighbors carry baskets from the market. Every afternoon, he walked beside the peaceful river. Every evening, he met Eleanor in the town square as she prepared the lantern for another quiet night. Life had found a gentle rhythm. One crisp October morning, Daniel noticed Eleanor sitting on her favorite wooden bench before sunrise. She looked peaceful. The first rays of morning light rested softly across her silver hair. She smiled as he approached. "I've been waiting for you," she said. Daniel sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The town was wonderfully still. Only birds welcomed the new day. Finally, Eleanor reached into her coat pocket. She placed the small brass lantern key into Daniel's hand. It felt warm from years of gentle use. Daniel looked at her with surprise. "I can't take this." Eleanor smiled kindly. "I wasn't asking." She looked toward the lantern standing proudly in the center of the square. For many years, people believed that I kept the lantern burning. She shook her head gently. But they were mistaken. Daniel listened carefully. The lantern never belonged to me. It belongs to anyone willing to slow down, to care for others, and to remind people that peace is always worth protecting. A cool breeze drifted through the maple trees. Golden leaves floated gently across the quiet street. Daniel looked down at the old key resting in his hand. It suddenly felt much heavier than brass. It carried kindness, patience, hope, and countless peaceful evenings. That evening, just before sunset, the people of Maple Hollow quietly gathered in the town square. Families stood together. Children held warm cups of apple cider. Neighbors smiled softly. No speeches were made. No grand celebration was needed. As the first evening star appeared above the hills, Eleanor nodded gently toward Daniel. With careful hands, he unlocked the lantern. He trimmed the wick, filled it with fresh oil. Then, he lit the flame. The golden light spread across the town exactly as it always had. Warm, steady, comforting. The people smiled, not because something had changed, but because the kindness of one generation had quietly been passed to the next. Eleanor watched the lantern glow one final time before closing her eyes for a peaceful moment. She breathed deeply. This town was never special because of the lantern, she whispered. It was special because people chose to become a little gentler every single day. Daniel looked around. Children laughed softly. Neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Dogs rested peacefully beside wooden porches. Fireplaces glowed behind cottage windows. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. And perhaps that was the greatest treasure of all. Years passed gently. Travelers continued to discover Maple Hollow by accident. Many stayed for a single evening. Some stayed for several days. A few never left. Every visitor carried home something invisible, a slower heartbeat, a quieter mind, a kinder way of seeing the world. The old lantern continued to shine every evening beneath the American sky, not as a beacon of fame, not as a famous landmark, but as a quiet reminder that even the smallest light can make the world feel a little warmer. On clear nights, Daniel often sat on the same wooden bench where Eleanor had welcomed him so many months before. He watched the stars appear one by one. He listened to the gentle wind moving through the maple leaves. He smiled whenever a traveler paused to admire the lantern. Sometimes they asked, "What makes this place feel so peaceful?" Daniel always gave the same gentle answer. "We simply stopped rushing." The traveler would usually smile, then sit down, then breathe a little slower. And somewhere nearby, the lantern would continue glowing. The river would continue singing. The stars would continue shining. The maple trees would continue whispering, just as they always had. And as sleep slowly wrapped itself around the quiet town, the wind carried one final message through the leaves. There is enough time. There is enough peace. You have done enough for today. Now, close your eyes. Let your breathing become slow and easy. Feel the gentle night surrounding you. The stars will keep watch until morning. The lantern will remain glowing through the darkness. And tomorrow,